All right, I think that's probably time to start. Oh no, your last one's in. All right, let's press on. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have an absolute treat for you coming up. The gentleman I get to introduce now, I've known him for some years, and he is pretty much universally accepted as the world's leading futurist in financial services. Brett has been a multi-selling author globally, best-selling author globally. 7 books now. He's one of the most prolific writers on futurism that you'll come across. The latest, which is The Rise of Techno-Socialism, is an absolute cracker. I would recommend you getting into it if you have any interest at all in this space at all. So Brett has a long and rather arduous list of achievements, but perhaps I can tell you a few of the ones that I admire the most. So he was the advisor to the Obama White House on Fintech. He has been quoted and had his book strategically placed on the desk of President Xi in China. And as he has been a mentor and a guide to a number of successful entrepreneurs, fintech, startups, neobanks, and I count myself as one of those. So without further ado, I'll shut up and let the main attraction come on. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett King.
Thanks, buddy. Good afternoon. Guten Abend, buenas tardes. It's great to be back on stage, you know. It feels good to be back in public, even though I don't know how many of us are going to go home with COVID, but that's another question. One of the things I didn't realize is that SAP has its own specific type of language. I should have realized this, that smart business casual means just take your tie off, right? Whereas in the States, it means a hoodie and jeans and runners, right? So, but fortunately, I came prepared. So, but I'm going to take you on a journey today. We're going to go full futurist, and we're going to look out about 30 years into the future and then sort of drill back down into what's happening over the next few years. We're going to look at the fintech space, crypto, collapse, all of that as well, and see where that plays into what's happening in the future on a long-term basis. So next 40 minutes or so, get prepared to have your mind expanded a little bit. Now, COVID obviously changed a lot of things. As the pandemic hit, it accelerated digital adoption. It changed the way we had to live. This is not unlike what happened, with the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919. It's also not dissimilar to other pandemics that humanity has faced. But the pandemic is just one crisis that we're going to have to deal with over the next 30 to 50 years. Another one that's really rearing its head right now because of the economic difficulties associated with the supply chain issues we had during the pandemic and so forth is gross inequality. This is a problem that's significant in the United States. The US has the worst inequality of any major nation since the Middle Ages. So, the top 1% of Americans own more than the bottom 90%. The wealth of the world's billionaires increased by over $10 trillion during the pandemic. So this problem of inequality is an issue. But of course, how artificial intelligence gets integrated into society, its impact on economies, the impact also of climate change. These are all elements that are creating gross uncertainty for society. As we start to think about policy and dealing with that, one of the challenges is that the system that we've created today, particularly capitalism, is not going to really work to resolve these things on its own. We have to come up with new paradigms. And in some ways, this is a philosophical shift for humanity in respect to how this is going to work. So we can recognize that the 21st century is going to be driven by the emergence of intelligence built into our world, smart economies. The world's leading economies will be those that are highly automated economies. And today, while we are obviously seeing the impact of technologies like social media and other things on the planet, we're talking about an entirely different level of integration of society with technology. automated resource allocation, most of our economy will be machine-to-machine based economy rather than individuals and corporations in the future. We'll have a lot of robotics, more robots on the planet than humans. This sort of thing is going to be a part of our future. Now, in this environment, and when we look at the economics of the 21st century, what sort of economies are going to be really successful? Well, China is going to be the world's #1 economy within a decade. And for many, this is a challenge conceptually, particularly Americans, because if China is the world's leading economy, what does that say for the US model of democracy and capitalism and so forth? China's answer to that would be, who's the developing economy now, bitch, right? Because it's like, the future of the way we think about economics, supply and demand and all of that, depends on our application of technologies at an economy level. And China is doing much better in investing in this sort of core infrastructure to be prepared for the 21st century. If you haven't visited China recently, I wouldn't be surprised, given their COVID policy. But once things settle down, if you get the chance to visit cities like Shenzhen or Guangzhou, smart cities are really part of the core of Chinese infrastructure now. Their investment in fast rail, their investment in solar. China deployed more solar panels and solar generation capability in the last 2 years than the United States has in all history. Right? So that shows you the acceleration of their economy. For every one PhD STEM graduate in the United States, China produces 5 today. So their readiness for the 21st century is acute. But we have to change the paradigm of the way we think about services at an economic level. So healthcare becomes a subscription service in the future. Today, one of the challenges we have economically is the cost of healthcare has risen significantly. From 2 to 3% of GDP in the 1970s and 1980s to now across OECD nations, across Europe, about 7% of GDP. In the United States, it's 16% of GDP. The US is extremely inefficient at healthcare based on their current system. They pay twice what the OECD nations pay for healthcare, and they often produce lower outcomes in terms of quality of health. But with technologies like 3D bioprinting, artificial intelligence-based diagnostics, gene therapy, and just even robotic process automation at an industry level, we can expect to reduce the cost of healthcare by about 70% in modern economies. But this subscription-based approach to healthcare at a national level, while producing longer lives and much healthier citizens, brings some complications, right? Because we have to create this automated system behind it. And manufacturing, resource deployment, all becomes these automated-based supply chains based on smart contracts, underpinned with digital money, whether that is a CBDC or whether it is a crypto or token. This is really how we're going to think about the underlying functionality of economies. So if you're going to compete in this world of the 21st century, at a company and a state level, you really have to think very differently about resource allocation. You have to think differently about human capital and where that fits in. It's a big paradigm shift. Robots are going to be part of our daily life. You're going to be having packages delivered by robots, food delivered by robots. This is a film you can watch on Netflix called Mute. Which was 2016, and they show this guy coming up and ordering his meal and it being delivered by a drone. He's sleeping on the floor, and the drone delivers his meal, sits it on the table, and lets itself out the living room window, right? Now, this looks like science fiction, but we know that Amazon and others are already working on this technology for this type of drone-based delivery. We know that we'll have automated vehicles that will be able to drive up to neighborhoods and dispense drones out of the back of those vehicles and so forth. So Yeah, we're going to have a lot of robots living with us. We're going to be driving in robots, autonomous vehicles. So, yeah, there's going to be probably by the end of the 2040s, billions of robots on the planet, more robots than humans. So just be kind to robots. You never know what's going to happen in the future, right? You might recognize this graph from Economics 101. This is a classic supply and demand graph in terms of the way we think about the operation of economies. But this is going to radically change in the 21st century. Because in this scenario, and this is part of the problem we've had at Heathrow and Schiphol and other airports recently, is because the demand dropped off, what did we do? We got rid of all of our human employees. All right? And so now that the demand's radically picked up again and we haven't been able to hire those employees back fast enough, we've got a supply issue. That's why we've had these chaos at the airports. And this has happened all around during the pandemic with supply chain issues. And so that's the way we used to deal with supply and demand. If demand increased, we'd put more people into the system, human capital. But in an automated society of the 21st century, you put in more processing cycles because now you have artificial intelligence that underlies the production capability of the economy, not human capital. So this is a major shift. That is as big as, if not bigger, than the Industrial Revolution. The unhinging or the disconnection of human labour from our core economics. Now, this, when you deploy this level of automation at a society level, we're going to create massive wealth through artificial intelligence. But the problem, obviously, is that the way we distributed wealth in the past was through employment and human labour. And that's not going to happen in the 21st century. So we need an alternative approach to that. If we don't have an alternative approach, then we're going to see society start to fall apart because as people lose their jobs and don't have the ability to get new employment, then it becomes a major issue. So this is why you hear entrepreneurs talk about universal basic income increasingly, because we really have this binary choice moving forward. We either ban artificial intelligence and all technology and all automation to keep humans in the workforce, or we find a way to help people survive without a 9-to-5 job that puts food on the table. So this is the conundrum of human labour in the 21st century that we're going to have to figure out. Now, one of the questions that comes up is who's going to pay for all this universal basic income? Well, the reality is, society will collapse without it, so that's the cost of not paying for it. But the reality is the wealth and abundance of artificial intelligence that it will create will easily cover the cost of UBI. And Europe is probably going to adapt in respect to UBI much better than the United States. China's going to adapt better than the US as well. The US may have to have a collapse of its governmental system before this is broadly acceptable. We don't know. I mean, it's a policy issue. Now, while we're talking about collapse, one of the issues we've faced during the pandemic is problems with food supply and food scarcity. This is going to be an increasing problem up until the second half of this century due to changing farm land usage and so forth. Over the last 50 years, we've lost 40% of our arable farmland globally due to erosion, pollution, warming temperatures and so forth. In fact, the Bordeaux region is obviously one of the world's major wine producers, but by 2035 we expect 90% of crops in the Bordeaux to be failing because of warming temperatures. That's the bad news. The good news is if you live in Britain, then around Kent, we expect Kent to become a major wine growing region because of the increase in temperature there. Now, in the scheme of things, that may mean we can produce enough wine for everybody to drink, but if you're in France, in the wine industry, this is a serious problem. And we see this play out in a number of areas in terms of food growth and so forth. So this is a major issue that we're going to have to deal with in respect to figuring out a solution to this. And some of that requires new thinking in terms of farming and methods. Now, food scarcity, along with sea level rise, is going to produce a massive influx of eco-refugees. The estimates vary very broadly here, from 300 million to 1.6 billion eco-refugees by 2050. So let's call it somewhere in the middle, 1 billion people. By the end of this year, we're going to hit 8 billion population on the planet, right? But 1 billion of those will be subject to some sort of eco-stress in the 2030s and 2040s. This is not something that, as a human society, that capitalism and the markets can resolve. It just doesn't have the tools to deal with a humanitarian crisis of that size. So we are going to have to think more like we did during the Second World War and other times when we've mobilized national and international resources to solve these problems. Putting it back to an economic question of who's going to pay for this is just not going to be morally feasible in terms of the scale of this is happening. So we have plenty of land that people can live on, but if you look at a lot of our nations, a lot of people live on the coastal areas. About 40% of humanity lives within 50 miles, 100 kilometres of the coast. Sea level rise by 2050 is expected to be about 1.5 meters. The problem with that is humans don't breathe underwater, so we need to come up with a strategy, right? And part of that is figuring out new ways of getting access to food and becoming more self-sufficient at a city level. Smart cities are, obviously part of that strategy. Lab-grown proteins, lab-grown meats would reduce carbon output by 4%. 4 or 5% if we could deploy that technology. We use 90% less water producing crop yields using this sort of hydroponic vertical farming methods. So we do have the technologies to fix the food scarcity problem, but we have to scale that up. And a lot of these solutions that we're talking about here are not necessarily economic solutions, but they are solutions to the problems from a humanity perspective. Homelessness, we also expect to be able to solve homelessness. If you've got 1 billion eco-refugees, how are you going to house them? Well, 3D printing technology for homes means we can produce a 2-3 bedroom home for a family for the cost of about $5,000 over just 48 hours in terms of construction time. So this is the technology we have available today. Obviously, we're going to get better at building this sort of capability. We may have floating cities in the future, other different ways of approaching human lifestyle. So then let's bring it back to the fintech and banking arena and sort of look at how fintech exists in this sort of smart world of the 21st century and what some of the trends are here. Because even though more recently we've had some issues in respect to the market globally, and we see fintech layoffs happening, we see the crypto collapse and so forth, we need to see what's been happening in terms of development of fintech contextually in respect to smart economies in the 21st century. We already see emerging that by 2025, we're going to have this type of cooperative ecosystem in respect to delivery of financial services in a real-time manner. And that is, you have the surviving banks. I say that with purpose because we have a lot of consolidation occurring due to digital transformation right now. You have the fintechs and the tech players, and you have data pools or data activity. They're sort of the key players, although you could sort of remove data because, in terms of the corporations, a lot of the data is held by the tech giants that we'll need to leverage for the embedded finance world. But when we talk about whether it's smartphones or smart glasses or your artificial intelligence-based smart speakers or your smart car, these are the devices that will deliver 99% of financial services in retail and commercial financial services day to day, and they require not just banks, they require other players to deliver that. Technology manufacturers, specialized fintechs, and so forth. I refer to this phase of banking as Bank 4.0. not just because I wrote a book on it, but because of the phases of development. And so the difference between sort of the traditional world of banking versus the embedded world of banking is largely that the bank products that we're used to, mortgages and credit cards and so forth, savings account, these disappear. These don't have any relevance in the future. We have savings experiences, we have access to credit, we have home buying, but we don't have the products that we built for the branch, where you signed a piece of paper to get access to them. We have the core utility of banking as an experience embedded through the technology layer. This is obviously producing significant changes. If you look at fintechs today, fintechs have a very different org chart to traditional banks. They don't have a mortgage department, they don't have a credit card department. And that's not because they don't have those products, it's because there are more efficient ways to organize the organization to delivering this utility than through those branch-based products that we know. One example of this is the core bank account. Now, how we've adapted to this in the West is we tend to have put a plastic card inside the phone. Right? This is how we think about wallets in the MasterCard, Visa, Amex world, right? Because we've got to keep the POS terminals going because the POS terminals are how we get interchange fees, right? This is the adaptation. So this is an iteration of the card model. But China, as you probably know, didn't adopt this interchange model. In fact, the payments networks that emerged in China in 2014, Alipay and Tencent WeChat Pay, used QR codes initially. Now, of course, they use facial recognition and fingerprint and voice recognition and other technologies like this to enable this. But the growth in the Chinese mobile payments industry has been incredible. Far, far greater and far faster than in the West in terms of mobile wallet adoption. And let me illustrate that with some numbers here. In China last year, they did this. I haven't updated these numbers actually. They did $76 trillion of mobile payments in China last year. The entire world with plastic payments did about $39 trillion in 2021. So Chinese mobile payments alone outnumber plastic card payments globally 2-to-1 today. That's just Chinese mobile wallets. And that doesn't include the likes of Paytm, M-Pesa, Kakao, Gcash, Paymaya, all of these other mobile wallet schemes that we have around the world. So already today, the dominant form of day-to-day payment is a mobile phone. It is not a plastic card. It is not cash. If you're here at a bank, representing a bank, and you guys are still issuing plastic debit cards, you're using 1970s technology in a 21st century world. Right? This is the reality. If you don't have a plan over the next few years to transition off of plastic, then your customers will be using a Chinese mobile wallet in the future. They won't be using your bank, unless it is just to top up their wallet. That's the likely scenario. Now, of course, the immediate reaction I get to this when I talk about this is people say, what about cybersecurity, and what about safety, because clearly that's an issue. Well, let me give you the numbers there again, because if you're being told that mobile wallets are unsecure, that's probably Visa, MasterCard propaganda. I know they're partners of SAP too, so I apologize in advance. But Alipay during Singles Day last year, November 11, it's the big Cyber Monday or Black Friday equivalent in China. Was created by Alibaba to celebrate singleness, right? But they did, I think, $85 billion worth of transactions in one day. Most of that went across the Alipay network. At peak, Alipay was handling 460,000 transactions per second. Visa's network can handle approximately 40,000 transactions per second at peak. So Alipay is already 10 times the scale of that and does it flawlessly. And did it with 0.0006 basis points of fraud. How does that compare to card-based transactions? Card not present fraud in the United States is 11.2 basis points, 10,000 times higher. Every time you use your credit card or your debit card, it's 10,000 times less safe than a Chinese mobile wallet. That's the facts. And they do it at much greater volume than Visa and MasterCard do. So this has been tested at scale. So this is one of the reasons that we're all going to move to mobile wallets, is that a 16-digit PAN, even if it's tokenized, is just not as safe as using biometrics like your face or your voice or your fingerprint for security. A 16-digit PAN, even if it's tokenized, can be copied and manipulated. You just have to work out a break through the encryption. If you're talking about biometrics, you have to really change the data at the source, which is a lot more difficult. One of the great changes that we've seen in terms of mobile wallet is the sort of contextual approach to things like savings. So Yui Bao, as an example, disrupted sort of the high-yield savings model in China. This was so successful in China that the central bank had to put deposit controls on Yui Bao, limiting it to 20,000 RMB per person, because it started to affect flow of capital into the capital markets in China. That's how big a deal it was. Now, if you look at why Yui Bao, as a savings feature of the Alipay wallet, was so successful, it's very simple. It's a behavioral tool. They popped up in the wallet and gave people a message saying, hey, you know that 5,000 RMB you've got sitting in your wallet? You should be earning interest on that. Click here. That was it. And Yui Bao literally translates as hidden treasure. That's the literal translation. So they were saying you've got this hidden treasure in your wallet, and you can just move it over to this savings feature that we have. Now, they offered a competitive interest rate, but why was this so successful compared with savings accounts that the banks in China offered? Because it was a behavioral approach to savings, not a product or interest rate approach to savings. And this is the experiential design element of 21st century banking that fintech is really starting to exploit. And when I say fintech, I'm including tech fins and the mobile wallets in those schemes as well. But mobile wallets are also going to be the bridge between the physical and digital worlds in terms of metaverse and crypto. This is a scene from Ready Player One, the movie on augmented reality, or VR, and you can see him go into an online store and purchase goods for shipment to his physical address. So that he uses a virtual store and purchase that. You aren't going to swipe your credit card or debit card in the metaverse. You're going to have to use a mobile wallet. And you're going to have to use that for central bank digital currencies. You're going to have to use that for crypto. So a mobile wallet is going to be the cloud-based wallet, and a mobile wallet is going to be the mechanism we use for maintaining our core assets. Now, on the fintech side, of course, we've had a massive explosion in fintech. The total size of the market is now over $7 trillion. Last year, we saw $210 billion invested. 21% of all venture capital deals globally were fintech deals, which means 1 in 5 VC deals was a fintech deal. So there's no shortage of interest in fintech. But of course, I know what you're going to say is that, yeah, but now look at what's happening to fintechs. We've seen massive layoffs. We've seen the crypto crash. Maybe it's over. Maybe the fintech experiment is over. Is that a fair enough assessment? Well, crypto's certainly got a bloody nose, and they're going to have to figure out a strategy moving forward. But the fundamentals of digital money and digital financial experiences, you can see the trajectory is there. This is not about the credibility of the fintech market, it's about the trajectory of technology we're using for delivery of financial services. Will crypto survive? Yes, because in these highly automated societies we talk about of the 21st century, they are run by smart contracts, AI to AI-based communication and AI-based operation of our supply chains. They will not use fiat currencies for smart contracts. You have to have programmable money to be able to make those to work. So that either is crypto, stablecoins, tokens, or CBDCs, or something else that we haven't thought of right now. So the fundamentals for this moving into the 2030s and 2040s are still strong. Now, again, we've had a lot of layoffs announced in fintech world, recently. Some big players laying off 10, 20% of their workforce. But keep in mind, even with what's happening right now in terms of the market collapse, we still only have about half the layoffs we saw in fintech in 2020. So in context, it's not as bad as what we already went through in 2020. And remember, 2021 was the largest ever year for financing in fintech. So the layoffs we're seeing right now doesn't mean that the market is not supporting fintech moving forward. It's just a cycle. But let me tell you about some of the fintechs that are successful. This is the world's largest challenger bank by customers and by assets today. It's WeBank. It's based in southern China, 240 million customers, and they were founded in 2015. Can you name any bank in the West that grew 250 million customers in 8 years using branches? Well, it's not possible. It's physically not possible. So this is a core characteristics of 21st century financial services organizations, that they work on the basis of digital scale, the ability to acquire customers digitally at a very low cost and to scale that up with a J-curve very rapidly. And this is what traditional banks are competing against. This is the major shift in terms of the core growth behind financial services in the 21st century. Scalability based on low cost of acquisition through digital. If you don't have at least half of your revenue being digitally oriented by the end of this decade, probably as a bank you will have been consolidated, because that's a core skill, even in this decade for continued growth for financial service organizations. Looking sort of a bit closer to home, well, in the LATAM market, we have Nubank. Now, Nubank, as you may be aware, listed in December. They raised $750 million back in June of 2021. At that point, they had 40 million customers, but today they have 56 million customers, I believe. $52 billion market cap in December with their IPO. Their blended cost of acquisition, just $5 per customer. They have a lower NPL ratio than other banks in the industry, and they are the primary bank for most of their customers. This shows you what is possible in terms of brand development when you focus on this sort of core digital acquisition piece. Looking at the comparators, Itaú became the second largest bank in Latin America after Nubank listed because Nubank's market cap was significantly higher than Itaú. Itaú is a 100-year-old bank, 96 years old, but they have 55 million customers, but they don't have the growth potential that Nubank has. That's why the market has awarded them with this higher valuation. What you'll notice is market analysts that talk about Nubank or WeBank or these, Revolut and these other players, they don't talk about asset size. They don't talk about return on equity. They don't talk about non-performing loan ratio. Investors just aren't interested in those traditional metrics anymore. They're looking at customer acquisition costs. They're looking at scalability. They're looking at growth across markets and the ability to handle that. It's a very different world in terms of valuations. Now, Revolut Nick from Revolut has come out and said that they don't have any concerns about the current market downturn. They have made some adjustments, a reduction in force, but they have enough cash for at least 2.5 years right now. Obviously, they raised $800 million back in 2021, so they're doing fine. And if you look at the UK challengers, 38% of salaries are direct deposited in the challenger banks today. So this gives us an indication of where market share is already shifting in the UK with the challengers there. And this is not just happening in retail, it's happening in SME and commercial banking as well. So how do you compete in this world of smart finance and embedded financial services experiences? Well, one of the things you do is you look at what's the core relationship a customer has with its bank account. And in the past, that was a relationship based on a brand, right? Who is the bank brand that you trust. But now increasingly it's becoming about the utility that the bank gives you. So TD Bank deployed MySpend, for example, this financial wellness component. They saw a 600% increase in customer retention using this tool. Customers that use these financial wellness tools saved on average 5 to 8% per month more than their contemporaries who just used a debit card, because it helped them and coached them on their money. Budgeting doesn't work, embedded financial wellness tools do. Predictive cash flow, as a result, is becoming a feature of mobile wallets like Google Pay and Apple Pay, where you can see what bills you have coming up based on, and whether you're going to be able to meet those commitments in the future. So your wallet is going to be able to tell you whether you can afford to go out for dinner on the weekend with your friends and things like that, based on the intelligence in it, right? You'll say, you'll be able to ask your wallet, because of open banking tech, to help you with your money management decisions day to day. And this is the promise of what a bank account should do for us. It should help us manage and save our money. But that's not how we've thought about bank account design in the 20th century. But it is how we must think about it in the 21st. So one of the things we've seen is buy now, pay later. Now, obviously, we've seen Klarna's valuation slashed recently to 6.7 billion, I think, from 35 or whatever. But the core utility of credit is shifting to context, embedded in purchase experiences, triggered by location, triggered by your behavior, other elements like this. It's not a product. You don't need a credit card in the 21st century. You need access to credit, but that can be delivered in real time based on what you're doing. So this is the way we have to think about the design of these systems in the future. Another great example of that on the SME side is Alipay's 310. 3 minutes to apply, 1 second approval, 0 humans involved in the process. In fact, one of the things that we see with WeBank, the largest challenger in the world, WeBank is able to handle 98% of its customer support and service inquiries using artificial intelligence today. Think about the cost dynamics of that from an overhead perspective. So all this traction we're seeing in respect to mobile wallets and contextual credit and so forth is driving us down to an instantaneous capability to access credit. It's not an application process where you wait for approval. It must be instantaneous, or you cannot compete in the world of the 21st century. That means you need better data, you need better algorithms, you need better technology. A great example of this is what would happen if you walk into a grocery store. And some of you probably heard me use this example before. You walk to the checkout and you go to check out and your card is declined. So what's the bank's solution to that? Well, you need a credit card, obviously, if that ever happens again. But a technologist will think about that experience in a different way, saying, well, I know how much you've got in your wallet. I know how much you spend on groceries. I know you just walked into a grocery store. I know you don't have enough cash for your groceries today. I can give you an offer when you walk in the store. Right? And that's contextual, experiential design of credit rather than a product-based design. Of course, the next tech we'll be dealing with is smart glasses. Apple is reported to going to be announcing this in September this year, releasing the product in January for their Apple eyeglasses, or whatever they're going to call it at the end of the day. But smart glasses, or what we call augmented reality head-mounted displays, that's the technical term, are going to be the next major personal computing technology we're going to start to use. 60% of the world's population already wears glasses. So, they're going to be prime potential targets for this technology. But you could ask the smart glasses, hey, do you know where I left my keys? And I'll be able to tell you that using image recognition as these capabilities. When you're walking out on the street, if you walk into your favorite coffee shop, your smart glasses can communicate with the shop's point of sale or AI, order your coffee. You can see online preferences presented in the offline world and so forth. It's sort of melding of this. But how would we design banking for this world to emerge over the next 2 to 3 years with smart glasses? Well, imagine walking into a Tesla dealership and being told you can't afford to buy a Tesla. But there is a Toyota dealership around the corner, right? This is the sort of intelligence we're going to expect from our smart glasses in terms of interaction on a day-to-day basis. Maybe a better example of that, which sort of incorporates open banking and so forth, is buying a home. Because a mortgage product or a mortgage broker in the 21st century won't exist, not in the way we think of it today. Because if you're going to buy a place on the water in Amsterdam here, which is obviously fairly expensive, 2.6 million euro, I think this place was listed at. If you're thinking about how to execute the purchase of a real estate property in the smart glasses AI experiential world, then you need to be able to give someone an offer for financing when they walk into a listed real estate property. Now, as a bank, today, you have to wait for a customer to ask for a mortgage. And you think that your interest rates on the mortgage are what is going to differentiate you from your competitor. None of that is going to matter in the 21st century, because if I know that you have the intent to buy a home, I now have a data advantage in terms of being able to offer you a home purchase in real time, experientially. So, big changes. As I mentioned before, the market is adapting to this. The market is starting to look at market cap, customer acquisition cost, digital scale, and all of these core metrics as at the heart of what we think about growth in financial services today. Those old metrics, assets under management, asset size. Whenever I meet banks in the US, they always tell me, oh, we're a $7 billion asset bank or whatever. And I'm like, that's not important. What's your market cap? What's your digital acquisition cost of customers? They don't even know, right? So you've got to think differently about this. The market and investors have already adapted to this. And if you're thinking, but when are these fintechs and neobanks going to be profitable? Just remember, Amazon wasn't profitable for the first 20 years of its operation. The investors literally do not care. They're much more concerned about grabbing market share right now than they are profitability. Yes, they will look at lifetime value and they'll look at what options these fintechs have for credit and so forth, but investors aren't investing based on profitability. And that is what's really spurring on these growth. And you can see that in 2021 in terms of the VC deals we saw. So at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. It's about scale. The ability of your organization to scale digitally if you're a financial institution. The ability to acquire customers at low cost digitally is the way you'll survive and thrive in the 21st century. It's that simple, really. And that is what's going to frame the largest financial service organizations of the next decade. By 2029, 2030, it's most likely that more than half of the top 20 banks or FIs in the world are going to be digital pure plays. Just a decade away, based on the current growth we see in the fintech market. I'm not sure if any of them will be cryptos, but we'll see. Possibly. I'll leave you with this one thought. I just produced this new book in January, Rise of Techno-Socialism. If you would like to check it out and find out more about what's going to happen over the next 30 to 50 years in terms of climate equality and what the options are for an optimal form of the human species, then for free, for sure, check out the book. But thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciated being here.